welcome to lesson 14. We are covering bone mechanisms today about the skeletal system. This first part is not in your book, but I do expect you to know it for your exam. And the rest of it should begin on page 121 in your book. First thing is talking about calcium exchange between bone and extracellular fluid. The first thing right here talks about if soluble calcium salts are injected intravenously, the calcium ion concentrations may increase immediately to high levels. Okay, so obviously we're talking about injecting it into your veins. The only reason that you would be doing this is because of hypocalcemia, which will typically is caused by toxic shock syndrome, which you will have to research for your online homework. And just in case you didn't understand me, it's toxic shock syndrome. And it's called hypocalcemia. Hypo means below. So it's a lower level of calcium in your body. And what this can cause is it'll cause paralyzation of the face and extremities. And it can also cause muscle cramps, not just the normal muscle cramps that you get like a Charlie horse, but it's severe. Spasms, sometimes tetanity, which is like tetanus, and then seizures. It also does have some cardiac effects as well. So on your heart, it can include decreased contractility of your heart, which will then lead to heart failure. So kind of serious deal if you do not have enough calcium in your blood and in your bones. So, and you can do that intravenously to spike it to high levels, but this is for treatable patients. Sometimes it's too far gone, like if you have tetanus, they're probably not going to do this to you because it's already through your body too much and you're not going to be able to repair. Okay, so within 30 minutes to 1 hour of having that done, the calcium ion concentration is going to return to normal. So what do we call that balance between extreme and then balancing it out in your body is called homeostasis, which hopefully y'all all know that. If large quantity of calcium ions are removed, the same thing happens. It's going to return to normal within about an hour. The bones that contain type of exchangeable calcium, and it's always going to be in equilibrium unless you have something like hypocalcemia or hypercalcemia. It just kind of depends on the person, but if everything is normal, it will be in equilibrium and will maintain that homeostatic balance. And you need to know homeostasis from now until the rest of the semester. Okay, this is talking about exchangeable calcium. A small portion of this exchangeable calcium is found in all tissues, cells, especially high permeable types of cells like the liver and the gastrointestinal tract. You're going to have more of this type of calcium there because that's where your food is being digested. But most of the exchangeable calcium is in the bone, which is why we're talking about with the skeletal system. It's only about 1% at the most of your total bone calcium, though. So everything else is going to be there, and then the 1% is going to be exchangeable and can kind of flux in and out. The whole overall importance of exchangeable calcium is it provides a rapid buffering mechanism to keep calcium ion concentration exchange in the extracellular fluid from rising to excessive levels or falling. Basically, the entire importance of this, and you can see it when I post the actual PowerPoint when I'm not talking through it, but this whole point of having this is to maintain that homeostatic balance. That's what I want you to know. Okay? It's worded funny, but that's the actual definition. The type of calcium, a ready movable salt, is going to be your calcium phosphate and a few others, but this is going to be your main one. Okay, now we get into where it is in your book on page 121, and we're going to begin with remodeling of a bone. You should already have read over this chapter, and so you should already be informed that the skeleton is formed of two of the strongest and most supportive tissues in the body. You have cartilage and you have bone. in embryos, the skeleton is primarily made of hyaline cartilage, which will then change to bone as the baby develops and goes into a young adult. Cartilage will still remain in a few isolated areas, like the bridge of the nose, parts of the ribs and joints, and in your ears. So if you feel that's why your nose is flexible and it's not hard on the tips of it, because that's cartilage. The process of making bones is called ossification, which I will assign you an ossification project next week, actually the next lesson, and we will be doing a project in class over ossification. But I'm going to tell you how bone is actually made, the ossification process, and it's actually being continually deposited by osteoblasts. There are two different types of cells here. There's osteoblast, which makes cells, and osteoclasts, which will remove bone tissue and break it up. So osteoblasts make cells, osteoclasts will remove that bone tissue and take away bones. And you can read over page 121 on your book to finish out the articular cartilages and figure out what happens to your hyaline cartilage as you develop. And I want to move on to the next slide, which will talk about the purpose and kind of the absorption of bone and what happens with the osteoclasts. Okay. Osteoclasts are going to be the large phagocytic multinucleated cells. Basically, it means that they're bone-destroying cells. Okay, they are bone-destroying cells. I said that right. You need those in order for your bones to grow, and you also need them just in case you get, let's say you break a rib and you have pieces of bones floating. You need to destroy those so that it can get broken down so that you can function normally and not have a piece of bone floating. Some people will have those floating anyway. If they get in like a car accident, they'll have it floating for quite some time before they even realize that it's there. But okay, when blood calcium levels drop below homeostatic levels, that parathyroid gland, which you know is located around your throat, will be stimulated to release the parathyroid hormone, or just PTH, and that PTH will then activate those osteoclasts. And they're going to cause them to break down that bone matrix and release calcium ions into the blood. And then vice versa. On the other hand, when blood calcium levels are too high, hypercalcemia, calcium is then going to be deposited into that bone matrix as hard calcium salts to make more bones instead and make more calcium available. Osteoclasts are normally active on less than 1% of the bone surfaces of an adult, unless there's some kind of injury or there's some kind of hypocalcemia, homeostatic imbalance that will cause it to become more active. Histologically, the bone absorption will occur immediately adjacent to the osteoclasts. And so if you're looking at your picture on page 122, it'll show you what's happening and when the bones are being reabsorbed and then added and reabsorbed. Okay, mechanism of bone absorption. This is going to be on page 122 in your book, and I want you to know that during bone absorption, osteoclasts will send out a villus-like projection, which you all have heard of microvilli before. It's just kind of finger-like projections that go up and down. That villi is going to secrete two types of substances as it goes out, and it's going to be a proteolytic enzyme, which we know enzymes do, they speed up reactions. And you have several different acids that are going to be released as well. You have citric acid and lactic acid, which the body will take away from different areas of your body. The enzymes will then digest or dissolve the organic matrix of the bone, and the acids will cause dissolution, dissolution of the bone salts. Okay? So everything's kind of being dissolved at this point. Then your osteoclastic cells will use phagocytosis and will eat those smaller particles of bone matrix and crystals, and eventually those will cause releasing the products into the blood, which will cause your calcium levels to rise inside your blood. Okay, your body, like I told you earlier, is almost always in equilibrium, except in growing bones. The rates of bone deposition and absorption are always going to be equal to one another, unless you're growing a bone from maybe development or possibly an injury. So the total mass of the bone should remain constant as an adult. We're not talking about children here, we're talking about adults. I do want you to look at page 123 in your book for types of bone fractures. And I do want you to know all of these different types of fractures. You're going to have a quiz over it, or if I forget to do a quiz, it's probably going to be on your test. So I want you to study that for your exam, because you need to know the difference between a green stick fracture and a depressed fracture. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory if you just read through them. But please keep that in mind, page 123 in your book. Okay, you all have all heard of vitamin D. We all know this is very, very important, and that you can get most of your vitamin D from the sunlight. And it also helps to maintain your calcium in your blood. Okay, so like I just said, vitamin D has a potent effect to increase calcium absorption from the intestinal tract. So it helps you absorb calcium better, which is why you need to be in the sunlight. You can't just be vampires. It also has important effects on both bone deposition and bone absorption. So it helps those processes go more smoothly. And you're going to read about all of this not in those pages. I don't want you using that book this year. Vitamin D and the importance of it, that's on a homeostatic imbalance on page 122. It's going to talk about rickets as a disease, and I believe that's the last thing that you're going to have to really study over before your online homework that is going to follow this little lecture. Again, you need to read over chapter 5 in your book to make sure that you understand where the bones are located, what the bones are. We'll be doing a review over the skeletal system in a couple class periods, and your ossification project will be assigned next class. Okay, bye guys. Enjoy.